Hello all, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Interested to know about the programming languages? Yes, the most important programming languages which is in the current trend is nothing but SQL, Standard Query Language. Maybe everybody would be aware of C, C++, Python, etc. Maybe SQL. Why not SQL? SQL is a very simple language, query language, which is similar to how we speak, but put forth in a form of syntax. So to know more about the SQL program, we'll start with some basics of knowing what is SQL, how SQL came into force, and what is the difference between the different programming languages when compared to SQL, and how the SQL formation started, how the data is stored so that the SQL programming can be used to retrieve the data. Likewise, so much of information can be gathered in these lecture series. So starting with, this is lecture series 1, which is SQL for beginners. Moving on to the next, what is SQL? So you can tell that it is a structured query language. So now, in today's world, data is at the core for every application. It is not only, the data not only belongs to SQL, it is the core for any application we develop. So here this SQL is going to interact with the data. Whether it can be a small user database or it can be a larger user database. Small database is nothing but just storing the phone numbers in our phone, or the larger database is nothing but where you have the population census stored in the government website. Yes, so when the data needs to be retrieved from the database where we store, maybe it is small or larger database, SQL is the one who is going to give you the, or it is the one which is going to construct so that the data can be retrieved. For that, you use a database management system, which you call it as DBMS. So here, the SQL become a standard of American National Standard Institute in 1986 and of International Organization for the Standardization ISO in 1986. So here with this SQL, that is the structured query language, you call this as a specialized programming language which is actually designed for managing and manipulating the data that is stored in different databases. There are many types of databases. In any databases where the data is stored, you're going to manage the data. So it actually allows the user to perform various operations like creating, updating, deleting, and retrieving the databases. So for that, you can use some platform that is nothing but MySQL, Oracle, and PostgreSQL. So this is the databases which is having sub databases which is connected to the main database. So this is where you will perform your query language. Moving on to the next slide, key principles of SQL. Yes, it is going to provide you a declarative approach. That is nothing but it is based on the principles of relational algebra, relational calculus, relating one to the another. Yes, in simple words. So you call it as declarative approach. Why it is declarative approach is that it is going to specify what data can be retrieved or what data can be updated or what data can be deleted, specification of what function it has to perform. So there are some several categories in which it is divided into some sub languages. That is nothing but SQL statements will be categorized into sub languages. Data query language, data definition language, data manipulation language, data control language. So what is data query language? It is nothing but it is used for querying the data. Querying is nothing but selecting a particular data. Data definition language, DDL. So this is used for defining the database. So whether you want to create a data or alter the data or drop a data into a database. Data manipulation language, that is DML. So The name itself tells it is used for manipulating the data. Manipulating is nothing but fabricating, right? So either you're going to insert or delete or update the data. Data control language, that is DCL. Yes, this is used for controlling the access to the data. Either you can grant the access so that the SQL query will fetch the data, or you can revoke, you can cancel the update. Moving on to the next slide, what can a SQL do? Yes, we already saw there are different sub-languages. It can execute, retrieve data, insert a data, update, delete, create a data. So here create can be done in different ways. It can create a new database, or it can create a new table in the developed database, or it can create a procedure so that in that particular procedure data can be fetched or deleted in the database. It can create view in the database, how a database can be viewed, set, etc. These are some of the SQL performance that can be done, what SQL can do. Moving on to the next slide, components of a SQL system. So these are the different components that a SQL system has. So is database. Database is nothing but it is a collection, structured collection of data. It can be organized in form of tables, rows, columns. It is actually used for storing information efficiently. That is why you call it as databases. Next is tables. Tables are nothing but this is the, you can term it as it is a fundamental building blocks of the database. So here is where you have data records of rows and columns. So here this table is going to ensure that it maintains the data integrity. That is by defining some structure or relationship between the data that is already stored. Queries. What is queries? Queries are nothing but the SQL command that is given. So that once the query or the command is given, the query will interact with the database and it will be used to update, insert or delete the data from the tables. Constraints. What is constraints? Constraints is nothing but they are set of rules that will be applied to maintain the data integrity. Stored procedure. Stored procedure is nothing but it is a SQL statement stored in the database, that is pre-compiled SQL statement or comments. Here the stored procedure, what it does is it can accept or execute complex operations and it will return a results with highest accuracy, highest efficiency. That is nothing but stored procedure. Next is transaction. Transaction is nothing but it is a group of SQL statement that will be executed as a single unit of work. Group of SQL statement that will be executed as a single unit. Here the transaction will ensure the data consistency, reliability, integrity, all those. Make sure it doesn't make the transaction fail. So other than this, there are some important components which you could see is views, index, data types, security permission, joins. These are all the different components that is being used in the SQL system for querying a data. Now, how actually the SQL works? Yes, structured query language. It is having all these parts: inputs, parsing, optimization, execution, output. So these are the main things to explain how actually the SQL works. So input is nothing but where the process actually begins. When say I am a user, I am going to submit a query which is going to interact with the databases. Then the query which I submit is said to be the input. That query can be inserting, updating, deleting, anything. Parsing. Parsing is nothing but now the query what I have submitted as an input will be passed to the processor. Now that query will be broken down into tokens because the system cannot understand the complete query. They are not human beings. So that are broken down into smaller units, which you call it as tokens. And that tokens is nothing but we call it as keywords. That is nothing but the name of the table, name of the column, name of the row. It can be anything. Now, the broken down tokens which is sent to the processor, now the processor will validate whether the syntax is correct or not. Once if it is correct and if it is ensured, then it is going to the next process, that is optimization. Optimization is nothing but here the query is handled with the optimizer. You have an optimizer to handle the query, correct syntax query. So which is going to evaluate in multiple ways whether it is right or not. Once the optimizer consider that the index or the table or the available resources are much sufficient to execute the result, then the query will run with the resource available, giving a higher performance. Now, execution. Execution is nothing but the execution engine will start planning how to provide the information to the from the optimization, how to interact with the engine, database engine, how to retrieve or manipulate or update the data in the database. And during all the steps, the SQL statement like select, insert, update, delete, all will be translated in form of action. Insert in the means it will be inserting some data that is already provided with the syntax. All those will be done in the execution. Then finally the output. Output is nothing but once all the execution process is over, that is performed with the query that is submitted as an input, the result will be formatted and it will be returned to the user. So depending on what query I have submitted, I'll be receiving the output acknowledging whether I have given submitted the select option. Then I will ensure that some database is being selected. If at all if the operation is insert, I ensure that the result has inserted some data in the databases. Yes. Interesting? Please be stay tuned for more information. The upcoming videos will cover in detail about the different types of databases available for the SQL to store the data and run the query. Thank you. Stay tuned.